In this quiz question, we wanted to take an int array called raw soc and reverse it, and in between each integer, we are going to, as we add it into an array list of integers, we will insert 3 at first random numbers, then 2 random numbers, then 1 random number, and then reset it back to 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1. So as we transfer this these numbers from an int array to an integer array list, we're reversing and adding a sequence of random numbers. Now, I had gotten this into a class called quiz, and it was going to be instantiated, so that's why this is not static. But some of the class asked if we could make it static so it'd be easier to run from a public static void main, which would look something like this, where I would create my own test soc array and then pass it there. Notice I'm using Java style camel casing here, and I'm using Python style underscoring here. If the rationale for why I wanted to use the static and what's going on with the main method and why it has to happen like this, if that doesn't make sense to you, then you should definitely stop by or send me a message so we can talk a little bit about the difference between this static method and the quiz instantiated method. So that's an important concept for you to start being comfortable with. So what I showed in the test was this was an encapsulated instance variable. That won't work. I can't access that instance variable from a static method. And so if I'm switching this to a static method, I need to make that what was an instance variable, I need to make it into a local variable for me to access the new array list that I'm moving this thing into. And so there we go. And we don't need to specify security levels on a local variable. Okay, so my counter will be int counter equals 3. So let's look through the hints that I gave you and just start transferring them into code. So I need to make now a loop. So if I have this, I want to start at 9 and count backwards and insert each one into this array list. So I'll do for int, and now the last element, if this ends at 9, that means it's got a length of 10, well, a length of 9 actually, but since this is the 0 spot, this last one is 8. So a length of 9, but the last one is 8. So I'll do raw soc.length minus 1. And even though this is called test soc, over here it is raw soc because that's what is coming in as the parameter. And now I'll loop down to x. Oh, sorry, I needed to specify int x, my counter. It starts at this last position. I'll loop down as long as x is greater than or equal to 0, because this is the 0 position. We need to include it. And then x minus minus. And now I'll start that. And so next I need to add to the social security number. So keep my spacing clean. And I will do soc.add. Now I want to get this last element, but that it's going to be wherever x is. So x is going to move down the indexes. It won't pretend to be these values. It's going to be the address. So I need to access raw soc at the address of x. So that will look up that position in this array, and it will add it to my new social security scrambled method. Now I need to add the random numbers in between. So I just added that last one, and now I need to add the 3 random numbers here. And so that's going to be for, I'll do int y equals 0, and I will do as long as y is less than this counter. So right now the counter is equal to 3, so it'll start at 0 and then go to 1 and 2. That's stop, and it'll stop. So that's 0, 1, 2. That's 3 random numbers that I'll add. And y plus plus. And now I need to add my random numbers here. So that'll just be soch.add again. And in order to add a random number, I want to make sure it's an int that I'll be adding. And I'll do math.random and just times 10. And that'll be, because math.random will give me a decimal point, it will be from 0 to 0.99, and that'll be multiply that by 10. It'll never equal 10, but it'll be either from 0 up to 9. And it'll drop the decimal because of this typesetting. So that should add that. Yep, that looks good. So I'll add those random numbers. So I did that. And now, the next time around, I don't want to add 3 random numbers. I only want to add 2 random numbers. So I'll do counter minus minus. Now, eventually, it'll drop counter all the way to 0, and it would keep on going less than 0 too. So what I want to do to prevent that is if counter is equal to 0, and you know, sometimes, I mean, it's not really necessary, but if counter is less than or equal to 0, not that it ever would go past that, but I often try to do that just in case for some reason in the code it happens to go down by more than 1 and it goes into negative territory. Not that it ever would. But if it does that, then counter equals 3, and I'll reset it back to 3. So if counter is equal to 0 or less than for some inexplicable reason, I'll move counter back to 3. And then when this goes back up, that should be it. So this is the whole answer. Now what I'll do is show you how I would have answered the original question, because I had made the question a little easier. But before I do that, let's go through this one more time. We've got the original number being passed into this method, this Scrambler method, and filling in this spot here, this parameter, and then it will be placed into this integer array list from an int array. We have a counter that was going to serve as our spacers between the random numbers that we have to add, and that first thing that we want to do is add the number. Then we will set a loop to add in random numbers. We're just using y here simply as our for the structure of our for loop, and we're adding in the random numbers that many times. And then we'll drop the counter by 1, so the next time through it'll only add 2 random numbers. And then we'll make sure that if it goes to 0 or less, that I'll put it back to 3, so that way once it hits 1, it'll go counter minus minus, it'll detect that it's now 0 and move it back to 3 and restart the pattern over again. Okay, now what I had originally said was that this was not an int array, this was just an integer, one big number, and so you couldn't as easily loop through it. You could split it into an array, but this problem asks you to just cut off this last number, and the way you can do that is it's not too difficult, and so most of this answer stays the same. But what we would need to do, since we can't loop like this, we would have to change up a couple things. So now that this is just one single number and no longer an int array, there's no reason that I need to loop through this array. So now I'm just loop 9 times, and I'll add 1 for each one of these. And so this is going to totally change. Now, how do I get this last number of an integer? Well, one of the tricks you can do is test soch modulus 10. If you divide by 10, all of these are multiples of 10, except for this whatever's in the singles place, or whatever's in the 1 spot. That's not divisible by 10, so cleanly. So that would be whatever that answer is. That's that spot. So add the answer to this will always be that first number. And then what I can do now is test soch is divide equals by 10. Now I'll just chop off, I'll divide it by 10, and I'll cut off that digit. And so that's really the only change that you need to make, because each time this will take the one spot and then chop off what was once at the one spot. And so it'll just chew through this number as it moves through. Oh, and I made a mistake. This is called test soc, but that's a local variable to this method. This should be called raw soc, and this should be raw soc. Okay. So I can't access test soc from here. That's a scope issue. That's local here, and it doesn't know what that is over here. But that's the only change that you would have to make. So it'd loop through 9 times. Each time I'd chop off that, and I wouldn't have to necessarily loop through 10 times. I could loop through as long as this is greater than or equal to 0, because I'm going to be chopping this number up as I go through. Eventually, it will be 0. But this will work fine as well, because since I know there are 9 numbers. Yeah, so that's it. If you have any questions, please let me know. Hopefully this makes sense to you. And if you don't like what your quiz score is, once you get it back, you can make corrections to it and submit it in for makeup.